I'm going to share with you 3 things over the next few minutes. I've got 5 types of scientific articles that I want to share with you. What kind of scientific articles there are. Number 2, I'm going to share with you 12 writing habits. Habits you can take with you when it comes to writing papers, about where to write, what kind of conditions be suitable for writing. And finally, number 3, I'm going to share with you a 5-step process for writing. Is that all right? Okay, so on to 5 types of scientific articles. All of you are probably familiar with data. You need data to collect and write an article. Well, what is a scientific article to begin with? Basically, a scientific article needs to have research findings obtained or written by researchers or scientists. All of you here, I'm sure, are doing some form of scientific research in your own way. So your article is presenting the findings of that research. And whatever you are churning out when you're publishing a paper, in the end will be considered a primary source, and that's going to be cited by many other researchers in your field. So you're not writing a book, you're writing a scientific article which is actually our bread and butter as a researcher. That's going to be the primary source of information. And what a scientific article will contain is actually the most recent work in the field. You also have references to previously published works. This is basically some of the aspects you would see in a scientific article. These are just 3 things that probably make up what a scientific article is. But there are 5 types of scientific article. Number 1, something that we are all familiar with, is really collecting data, doing research to collect the data, and that's a basic research data paper. So a lot of you are trying to do that, and that's something we're all familiar with. And one of the aspects is a research data paper is based on is it has to be original research. So the kind of research, again, in your field may depend on whether you are working on from the industry, you're working on fungi, for example, working on the pharmaceuticals related to forestry. These are depends really on your field, but it may involve experiments, surveys. You also may be actually asking people, if you're managing a forest concession, you're asking local communities how they feel about forest management, for example. This will involve semi-structured questionnaires like what you saw earlier. So again, it doesn't have to be research that involve experiments, can really involve questionnaires as well. But ultimately, you need to collect raw data, which you will then analyze the raw data and then publish the findings. So the research paper will be based on the analysis and interpretation of this data, and that's what a research paper, data paper will consist of. You need to analyze and synthesize the information and interpret it and let people know. So this is what all of us are more familiar with over the course of your career in forestry. If you want to talking about publications, for example, this is a paper we recently published in the journal Forest Ecology and Management. So I've noticed that a lot of you here, or just now those have published, you may not have published in this journal before, but it's quite a decent journal. And so in this paper, my colleague and I, we actually showed that forest management is vital for the persistence of the Malayan sun bear. So if you haven't seen this article, go check it out. But what we show is, again, data papers involve the collection of data. So what we did was we put out cameras in the forest to photo capture sun bears, and we did analysis using camera traps, and then we published the findings. So that's a basic data paper. Yeah, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Number 2, again, this is another kind of scientific article. It's called a review paper. And I've also noticed from your articles just now, which you shared over the chat, most of them actually were data papers, right? Maybe I missed out 1 or 2, but I think they mostly were trying to involve the collection of data. You synthesize the analysis of data, did some interpretation, and presented it well. You can also publish a review paper, and a review paper is based on other people's work, other published articles. So it does not report original research. I'll show you some examples later where you read up a lot of other people's work, and then you synthesize in your own way. You summarize the existing literature based on what you've read to explain the current state of understanding of the topic. So review papers are a great way to get published. You don't need to have lots of funding to go out there and collect data, you can just sit in your laptop, trawl the information from the web using publication databases, which are freely available to some. If you were lucky enough to have funding to pay for databases like Scopus, Web of Science, then you'll be able to download the papers and do a more comprehensive review. But if you don't, you can also use Google Scholar to create a review paper. Example of a review paper. Well, I just wanted to, for those of you who are not familiar with Malaysian forests, you can check out the forestry department website and you will see all the types of forests that can be found in Malaysia. For those of you who haven't come to Malaysia, please visit FRIM, for example. FRIM has a lot of great researchers there working on forestry issues, and you have a lot of FRIM colleagues here today. So hopefully make some friends and pay a visit and to the secretariat as well, which AFPRI is based. But here's an example of a review paper that I wrote a long time ago on cloud forests. So is sustainable use of tropical montane cloud forests possible in Malaysia? See, that one you notice this up in the clouds. So it's a very catchy term that we created in the title. It's something we want you to take note. Sometimes the title makes or breaks your paper. You need to come up with a catchy term, like a primer, just to get people's attention, and that also makes it easier to publish. So cloud forest is something that my friends and I, we knew nothing about. We wanted to see, well, can we actually sustainably manage tropical montane forests? So montane cloud forests are one example of forest you can find in Malaysia. And what we did was we actually looked at the region just to analyze where's the potential distribution of cloud forests, all these areas in red in the region in ASEAN. And then we put some pictures of examples of cloud forests in Malaysia. What are the threats facing them? For example, agriculture, development. So these are, you can also think of figures in review papers by having pictures, not just always figures and tables. These are also part of review papers. All right, see, I raise a hand. Can you ask the question, please?
Yeah, thank you. Just my question is that if we just screen through the scientific paper by seeing the article name, do you actually recognize it is review paper or just it is the another scientific paper? If we don't, if we in the article it is not mentioned that a review or any other thing, that just previously you just display a paper that is where the no review is mentioned. So could we just actually recognize that this is the review or not going through the article?
So I based on what I understand from your question, are you asking whether you need to specify your article as a review paper or data paper when you submit to a journal? Is that your question?
Actually, not this. No. Yes, this is the one portion. Another thing is how to actually recognize when I just reading through the article name. Oh. Okay.
How can you recognize that? So yeah, it's tough to actually recognize based on the title itself. So you have to read it to find out whether it's a data paper or review paper. But sometimes there will be written up here in a journal article that will say it's a review paper or data paper. In the journal itself, it will help categorize for you. Yeah.
Yes, in the time it is very much easy, but whenever it is actually not mandatory to write the review.
Nope. It's not mandatory to write a review paper, but it can help you get published and help you boost your CV. It will give you citations, and review papers are also useful to gather the existing knowledge of a current topic together so that people can refer to your paper. So if you want to become an expert in cloud forest, for example, publish a review on cloud forest, and people will always cite your paper when it comes to cloud forest. So that's one way to kind of get famous or noticed in your field. All right.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
another thing is that you mentioned that how could actually we write a review paper in a different journal? You just mentioned it.
Yeah, we will discuss that later, how to write a review paper.
Thank you.
All right. So here's a review paper that also has more pictures. We just put pictures of the animals found in cloud forest. And again, there are some journals will just like you to publish papers based on just having all these articles. All right, so I just want to show you an example of a cloud forest in Malaysia, but this is what it look like. Come and visit Pahang, for example. There's the Fraser's Hill Forest Complex. If you're keen on visiting Malaysia, it's a fantastic area to check it out. If you're interested to go to Sabah and visit the Crocker Range or Kinabalu Range, beautiful cloud forest over there. Okay, second review paper that I wrote a long time ago, it's on limestone forest. So we also have limestone forest here, but it's not in the frame website, forestry website, sorry. But this is what limestone outcast limestone cast forest look like. This is in Terengganu. Sorry, Mazmur, do you have another question? Is your hand raised? Sorry, I see a hand raised. No. Okay, so this example of limestone cast forests. And we also wrote a review article, limestone cast of Southeast Asia. And you notice here we wrote Imperiled Arcs of Biodiversity. So this is an example of a very catchy title. I'm going to how to write titles later, but again, this colon is a very powerful use of the punctuation mark. When you state something, what you're actually trying to write about, limestone cast of Southeast Asia, and then you tell people, well, these are imperiled arcs of biodiversity arcs, like for example, following Noah's Ark, you know that they are full of animals, and we're trying to say here that they are threatened arcs of biodiversity. So a lot has to go into a catchy title, and again, this comes from experience, all working with people who can give you a catchy title. Again, if you always need a catchy title, let me know. I can provide some advice in the future. So what do we do again? Notice the similarities. We have a map showing all the different limestone forests in Southeast Asia. Again, we have another nice map showing nice limestone hill, quarried limestone hill, what limestone hills are used for in Malaysia. For example, we have one used for religious worship as well as tourism. So just pictures can really tell 1,000 words. And again, what kinds of animals you can find on limestone hills. We have strange begonias, even more bizarre looking land snails like this, a bat, and as well as a crab in the cave. So this is a bizarre snail that I found on a limestone hill. This is no joke, just a millimeter or so. A lot of these land snails are endemic to limestone hills, and if you quarry the whole hill, they disappear forever. So managed to get this snail on the cover of this journal called Bioscience. So Bioscience, yeah, that journals like that publish review papers a lot. So go check it out. If you're interested to publish a review topic, this is a good American journal to target. So they featured the snail on the cover. All right, so there's 3 types of review papers actually. The ones that what I've been writing so far, a narrative review, which explains the existing on the topic based on all the published research out there. There's also a systematic review, which is more in-depth. Involves some analysis where you target keyword searches to find answers to a particular topic based on existing scientific literature. There's also a meta-analysis kind of review paper, which really involves a lot more analysis and statistics to try to see the effectiveness of an intervention or mode of treatment. So when going into details of how to do a meta-analysis, it's really a course in itself, but you can always focus on just writing a narrative review without much analysis, without need for statistics. All right, on to the third kind of paper. We have a short communications paper. What is a short communications paper? This example of a short communications. We found a record of a clouded leopard eating a binturong. That's all. We have a picture of that in the forest, just like this. And then we managed to publish a short paper, probably sometimes less than a page or so. And that's also publishable. Number 4, we have a type of paper called the opinion or editorial kind of paper, where you just present an opinion on a topic. You have a strong opinion about a certain topic on forestry. You are still allowed to write whatever you think, but your opinion should be stated clearly. And throughout your opinion piece, you should give various arguments, reasons, or viewpoints on the topic and support these with the relevant evidence. Example of a opinion editorial paper that I wrote was this paper in Conservation Biology journal, published by the Society for Conservation Biology. So it's about moving away from paper corridors. So again, try to find a title which is a bit vague, trying to tease you to read the paper, because what is the paper corridor? So sometimes your title needs to be catchy and vague at the same time. It doesn't always have to be explicit and specific to your topic. You need to have a pool to readers to try to see what they are. So for me, a paper corridor was a wildlife corridor that's on paper legislated, but in reality, it's a corridor that's full of threats People are going in, taking out logs, taking out biodiversity. So it's actually a paper corridor. It can crumble very easily. So this is how the opinion piece starts. You can just have a nice sentence at the start talking about, well, corridors are important solution for conservation, but then you can give your opinion here. Well, at best, a poorly implemented corridor is a waste of public funds. That's your own opinion. And at worst, it's a conservation measure that legitimizes habitat destruction. So corridors can even accelerate the decline of rare species, allowing invasive species to spread. So then you put your citation here to support your explanation. So opinion piece can sometimes just have to be just one page or so, right? So, all right. So these are examples, and on the fifth kind of paper, we have a response paper. Let me see the chat group for a while. Yep, there'll be a recording. Thanks a lot. Yep. Okay, so a response is someone wrote to your paper. For example, I published this paper called the Safe Index, using a threshold population target to measure relative species threat. So this was written quite some time ago. With my colleagues, we came out with the index on how to measure how far a species is from extinction. Then what happened was a lot of authors were not happy with the paper. They said, well, your safe index is nonsense, it's not safe. Your safe index should not be used for prioritization. So a lot of flack, a lot of haters for the manuscript, but that's good because then you're allowed to publish a response. So this is what our response was: better safe than sorry. So again, another catchy title that the editors like. And we looked at all the arguments, and then we said, well, we respect your criticism of our paper, but we feel our paper is still good, and we explain why. So another kind of paper is a response. So depending on where you publish your paper, publish in a high-profile journal, you'll get some critiques from your colleagues, your peers, which is good. It's healthy debate, and then you're allowed to respond. So these are your 5 types of articles that you can write as a scientific article: your research data paper, your review paper, your short communications, your opinion editorial, and finally a response. Okay. So there's some homework for you. I want you to later download this presentation. There's a Google form there. I want you to answer the question in the Google form, and we'll go through the answers next week. I want you to answer me which type of scientific paper usually gets the most citations. Why are citations important? Because if your paper is highly cited, that means you're getting the respect and view of your peers. It's a really important scientific work. But if your paper is not getting citations, maybe you publish your paper in a journal that's not really popular. It's no reason. It's not to say your paper is lousy. It's just sometimes you choose a journal that is not really accessible by a lot of people. But there is one of these scientific papers that usually gets the most citations. I want you to tell me why. Is it the research paper? Is it a review paper? Is it a short communications? Is it opinion, or is it a response? So I want you to answer this question. I'm going to give you the link later. This is your homework. Okay, there are 3 questions you need to answer. Question 2, I want you to go and give me a link to a type of forestry related paper for any category from the internet, and state the type of paper. So for example, if you are keen on you found a paper, I want you to categorize it, whether it's short communications, is it opinion, and then give me the link. And that's also something part of your homework. And I'll give you the 3rd question later at the end of the lecture. So these 2 questions answer in the Google 321 form a little bit. Don't worry, I'll give you the PowerPoint. You can see the first question again. No worries. All right, so we've covered the 5 types of scientific writing. Now I'm going to go on to the 12 writing habits. So these are based on my experience, my colleague experience, on what is conducive for you to write. And if you're ready, I'll launch into that. Number 1, a lot of us are working in offices, shared offices with people. I used to work like this in the National University of Singapore, but research has shown that it's better to write your papers in a really quiet and isolated place. So you're having trouble getting motivated to write papers, it's really important for you to write papers in a quiet, isolated place. So your boss tells you, hey, I want you to write a paper by next week. And if you are surrounded by lots of people in your office, you tend to gossip, tend to share with your friends what's going on every day. These conditions are not good for writing papers. So try to avoid that as much as possible if you want to write a paper. Number 2, keep your workspace clear of junk. This was my former professor's office. Crazy, lots of paper there. It's kind of a mess. So what he did was he came to office every morning, did his email, and then went home to write his papers, because clearly it's hard to focus on write papers in such a environment. Or if you could put plants if you want to keep you focused. But again, try to keep your workspaces clear of the relevant junk. Okay. Dark offices are also quite useful if you're finding it difficult to work in a bright environment. Sometimes dimming the light or turning off the light can help you focus, and this is especially good for extroverts. Apparently, research has shown that to go into your cave and focus on what you're doing. Number 4, again, if you are swamped with emails every day, try to close your email. Don't be tempted to check your phone or emails on Outlook or Gmail. Try to focus on writing papers without any email distraction. Number 5, find a sacred time for writing. Sometimes the best time to write is after your kids go to sleep, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, no disturbance, no emails coming in. Choose that time, or wake up in the morning early, 5, 6 a.m. Choose writing, because it's so difficult to try to write throughout the day these days. And also find a sacred time for reading. So if you're not able to write papers, if you can't read articles, so reading is so important. Try to find your sacred time for writing and reading. Again, it could be at night or early in the morning. Number 8, a lot of times we are trying to drink a lot of coffee and soda to keep awake, to try to write. Research has shown that actually it's more better to be relaxed than hyped on caffeine. So again, if you're drinking too much coffee and you're trying to write papers, might not be good. Better to go do some exercise and feel relaxed when you write a paper. Number 9, if you're tired, take a nap and start fresh. A lot of times we try to cram so much in our work. We're tired, we try to squeeze out a few lines, not good. Always try to take a power nap before you actually start afresh. Number 10, time is precious. Try to get a laptop to do your work anywhere, anytime. I used to go to the university on the train all the time. There's so much time, 1 hour from my house to the university, but I got a laptop and I started typing away, and that got me a lot of time spent to finish up my papers. So again, you might not want to invest in laptops. If you can't afford it, that'd be a great asset to invest in. Number 11, when you're trying to work on a paper, try to write at least 1 sentence every day, even on the weekends. Right? Don't try to cram everything into the weekday. For example, you want to spend like 2-3 hours trying to focus on a paper. Ideally, you should have about 4 hours per day of writing, but it's not, of course, not realistic for some of you. So try at least to push yourself, open the manuscript every day, write 1 sentence, and then you might get the juices flowing. You might be keen on writing more. And that actually has shown that once you get into the zone or writing, you might actually be writing a lot of stuff in the end. So try, even on the weekends, Saturday to Sunday, I know it's precious, try to write 1 sentence every day, okay? Number 12, if you get inspired by a particular topic, you are noticing, you observe something, you're asking a question, why is this so? If you come up with a research topic, try and write down notes on the paper. Stop what you're doing, write some notes, scribble down, open your phone, write an email. Because sometimes if you don't write these notes, you forget what you're planning to do in the first place. So these are one example. I was in the forest one day driving along the road and I found this elephant skull. And my supervisor, who was with me at the time, asked me, "Hey, Ruben, how far is the elephant from extinction? Is elephant close to extinction in Malaysia?" Well, it's an interesting question. I didn't know the answer to that. And what we did was we actually came up with the formula. We came up with a safe index, log 10, population of the species of interest minus log 10 minimum viable population target. So these are all formulas that we came up with. Just within just 2 weeks, we managed to publish a paper. So just because of one observation of an elephant skull that triggered us to ask us, how far are species from extinction? What's the ability to forestall extinction? We came up with the index in just 2 weeks. All right, so enough from me. Just some of the 12 writing habitats that I shared just now. Can I get you in the audience to share with me anything from your experience on writing tips? Just type it in the chat group here. If you have any, feel free to share. Or any questions? Any writing habits to share? What works for you? What doesn't work? All right, if not, no worries. This again, feel free to take some of these pieces of advice. Might not work for everyone. You at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable writing, but these are some of the tips that I would like to share with you based on what I've learned that helps productivity over the last few years. Okay, so we're done with the 5 types of scientific articles, 12 writing habits, and now I'm going to share with you a 5-step process on how to write a paper. Again, this is just my experience. You might not have seen this out there, but it's unconventional way of writing. We all used to thinking of writing our introduction, our material methods in a sequence and logical order, our results of discussion. But my mentor, who's a well-published person, his H index is crazy, it's 100 over. He actually does his data analysis first. So you may have heard people say you need to do your lit review first, write introduction first, come up with the title first. Forget that. Once you have your data, do your analysis first, and then try to create at least 3 figures or tables. Example of a figure that we created. Again, your figures these days need to be a bit catchy as well. You know, sometimes you might put an icon of an animal inside. You don't always have to use an Excel graph to come up with nice figures. These graphs were created in Program R, freely available software, which probably for a course for another day, how to use R. But nice figure like this actually makes or breaks your paper. Sometimes reviewers in a journal will just flip to your figure. This figure, good quality. All right, I'm gonna send it on for peer review. If your figures and tables are so rudimentary, they're not sophisticated, that may actually throw your paper, editor might throw your paper out because of just not having nice visuals. So unfortunately, we are all visual creatures. You may have the best data, the best analysis, but if your figures and tables are not catchy and not eye-catching, you might be in trouble. So again, once you figure out your 3 figures or tables, again, rule of thumb, the Steve Jobs principle of 3, it's always good to have at least 3 things in your paper, 3 figures or tables, get it done first, and then you write up your results. Once you have your figures in place, start writing up what each figure means. You may have a lot of results from your analysis, but if you report all 10 results from your data collection, too much information kills information. So always focus on 1 to 3 key results from your paper. You might want to publish the rest later. All right. So this again, it's a tip for you. Number 3, once you're done with the results, then you can create a mind map. If you're not familiar how to create a mind map, you can Google it, but this is what a mind map might look like. For example, species evolution tree from Charles Darwin, because drawing out images sometimes will allow you to imagine what your paper will look like. So you can create a mind map, or you can create a Word document and show outlines with various headings. Create the headings first. For example, each introduction might have a few subheadings. Each material methods might have a few subheadings. Each discussion section also might have a few subheadings. Write it out first, and then you put the meat into that. That's something that some people recommend. Like for example, I'm writing a paper right now on what the challenges to forest carbon projects are in Malaysia. For example, this is the subheading, and what the challenges are. Once you have the skeleton in place, then you can start inserting the points and references under each heading. And next thing you know, lo and behold, you have a paper ready. So only after you're done with the results and done with your mapping, your outline, then you start writing your abstract. Your abstract should come next, because people say your abstract is like a roadmap guiding your entire paper. And then you go into your introduction, material methods, discussion, and references finally. So this is a 5-step process that you might want to consider when it comes to writing papers. Any questions? All right, so if no questions, we can take a 5-minute break before we end up the last part. This is the end of part 1. It's going to be a short part 2. We aim to end at 4 o'clock in half an hour. So right now it's 3:36. We'll just have a 3-minute break, and we'll start at 3:40. Feel free to ask questions in this break while I wait for the next part, which is just a short few slides before we end today. All right, welcome back. So that's end of part 1. And now we're going to move on to 3 things again. This is part 2. I'm going to share with you some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to writing papers. And finally, what makes a good title, what makes a good abstract. So there are 3 do's and don'ts I want you to take note of when it comes to writing papers. Let's go on. Let's go ahead and get on to it. Number 1, do use topical sentences when you write papers at the start of each paragraph. What is the topical sentence, you may ask? It's basically a sentence that expresses the essence of the whole paragraph. It summarizes the whole paragraph, and it usually appears at the beginning of your paragraph. So these are topical sentences. Give you an example. In Southeast Asia, the tropical island of Singapore has undergone dramatic transformation due to urbanization. So a lot of you are sometimes tempted to put a citation here. For example, Clement et al. Said this. Don't need. All right, the first particular sentence of a whole paragraph should summarize what you are going to say in the entire paragraph. So the use of topical sentences are also reflection of a good quality piece of work. So try this. First sentence is usually something that you come up with. Doesn't need to be referenced from somebody else's publication. It shows that you have originality of thought, and this is something that you need to come up with yourself to summarize the rest. So then you can see, you can back up with this sentence with references towards the end, and that's how, this is what a topical sentence looks like. So please try to explore using that. Number 2, you need to use the first person style. Take ownership of your work. What's the first person style when it comes to writing? It basically means the writer becomes the focal point. First person personal pronouns include I, we, me, us, my, mine. These are examples of pronouns that you use. For example, I'm going to ask you here, which sentence uses the first person style here? Is it the first sentence or the second sentence? Just type it in the chat group so I can see what exactly is the first person style. Great, thanks Angelica. Sentence number 2, yep. So a lot of you might be heard from your previous mentors, this third person style is more accurate, but actually it's the second one that conveys confidence and ownership. So you need to take ownership of your results. And there's a lot of times we lack confidence when you write papers. Number two, exactly, that's a first person style writing. You need to show to the reviewer that you are confident of your results and you're taking ownership. That's why we use the first person style. Okay, number three, use qualifiers in your results if you're not confident, if they're not conclusive. Along science, facts are rarely the products of our research. We rarely come up with laws or theories. We have come up with some kind of finding that may suggest something, but they're not conclusive. So qualifiers are words or phrases added to another word to modify its meaning by limiting it. So for example, somewhat here is a kind of a qualifier. He was somewhat busy. These are qualifiers. So in science, you're allowed to use that. And in fact, it's encouraged, because if you don't use qualifiers, you are too, how do you say, sure of your results, reviewers might pick a hole and say, are you sure you did all the experiment correctly? Maybe there were some variables that you failed to consider. Again, the test for you, which of these sentences are using qualifiers? Number one or number two? Great. Yep. Number one. Most of you say number one. Yes. This is a qualifier. Our results suggest that the fungus is killing the frog. You cannot say that our results confirm that the fungus is killing the frog. So this is something you should avoid when it comes to writing. Try to use qualifiers. All right. Great. Fantastic. All of you are seasoned pros now, but don't. For example, there are 3 don'ts that I want you to do is don't use too many qualifiers. For example, our results suggest that a fungus may be killing a frog. So there are 2 qualifiers here, right? Just use one. If you use too many qualifiers, that shows that you actually are not confident of your results as well. That's also a bad thing. Number 2, don't do something. There's a paper I came across the other day called Understanding the Drivers of South Asian Biodiversity Loss in this journal called Ecosphere. And I was reading it. What struck me was this. Can you tell me what this author is doing wrong here? Those of you who know the answer, just type it out, give suggestions. What is this author doing wrong? Don't do this ever again. Link recitation. Well, yeah, there's also one potential option. Yeah, these links should be in the references. Aside from that, something to do with the style of the writing. Any ideas? All right. This paragraph is too long. Avoid writing long paragraphs. By now, there should have been a break somewhere here. Again, this is all comes with experience. Yes, the arrangement of paragraph is not pleasing to the eye. It's too long, Angelica. Yep, you're right. So avoid long paragraphs. Whatever you write, introduction or discussion, material methods, always try to use subheadings. All right, these help break up the manuscript and also allows you to organize your thoughts better. So don't use overly long paragraphs. Number 3, don't do this. Can you spot what's wrong in this paragraph? Exactly. Thanks, Rika. There are too many abbreviations here, and it's really not cool. People want to see if it's possible, describe it the whole word. If it's being repeated a lot of times, then yes, you can use an acronym. But if it's just occurring once, for example, contributing index, you can just spell it out throughout your manuscript. You don't have to always give a variable all the time. So acronyms kind of make things complicated when it comes to reading, so try to avoid acronyms. Don't use too many acronyms unless you are forced to. All right. Okay, any do's and don'ts to share from the audience based on your experience? 3 do's and don'ts we've covered. Okay, if not, I'm going to move on. Thanks a lot. What makes a good title? On to number 2. So as I showed you just now, a couple of review papers, you need to have a catchy title, and it should actually capture the meaning and the main point in the title itself. And that's the key thing, really. Can you use a word like shit in the title? Yes, you can. Shit happens to be useful. The use of elephant dung as habitat by amphibians. So again, it's really catching the author's eye. You want to set your paper apart from others using words like that. It is possible in science. In this case, my colleague happened to find amphibians living in the elephant dung or shit, and he says, well, shit happens to be useful. So great, that was one of the highly cited articles, papers, just because of a very catchy title. So again, try to explore also the use of the colon. The colon is a very powerful punctuation mark you can use in your title, as I showed you just now. Really, the title should also avoid being too specific. Sometimes you're tempted to find out the effectiveness of this compound on a particular animal or tree, for example. You need to try to think of ways to make it catchy. So what I did here in one of my articles when I first published, there's importance of reservoirs for the conservation of freshwater mollusks in the tropical urban landscape. A lot of the times we're tempted to put the actual location. This study was done in Singapore, for example, and a few lakes, but I did not put Singapore here. I just called it a tropical urban landscape. So this was actually a vague title that actually then invites people to say, what is this tropical urban landscape you're talking about? Oh, okay. When I read it, it said Singapore. So you're not lying here. You're not deceiving. In the article itself, you mentioned Singapore, but as a title itself, you need to be try to vague as possible, but not too vague. But you have to be avoid from being too specific, because then it loses its catchiness. So this is something that you want to consider when you write titles in the future. Again, if this could also apply to a tropical urban landscape like Kuala Lumpur, for example. But you write Kuala Lumpur there, it doesn't seem as nice. So just try to think of a vague general term, and that will boost your chances of your paper getting into a publication. Sorry. All right. The question number 3 in the Google form I'll show later is, find me an example of a forestry related article with a catchy title. How you do that? Check out Google Scholar. If you can, find me one, and then we'll share that next week. All right, that's the third question. So this is question number 3, not question number 2. You have 3 questions already. Try to do that. All right, so on to the last part of part 2, what makes a good abstract. I want you to take note. All right, good abstract should answer the following. It should say why you're doing this, which is the problem, basically. What are you doing? What your aims and objectives are? What did you do? Which are talking about what briefly mention your methods in the abstract. What did you find? Again, the main results. Don't try to present entire results there. Just summarize some of the main findings. And finally, what's the significance? What the implications of your work? So these 5 aspects should be in your abstract.